All right, and hello everyone. We're here today with two very influential people within the blockchain space, Stephen, CEO and co-founder of Arbitrum, and Sreeram, CEO and founder of EigenLayer. My name is Rishi from Google Cloud. We have a lot to unpack here, so why don't we just get straight into it? I'm going to start off with a couple of questions on the academia side. Both of you have transitioned from academic research at top universities to build some of the most critical infrastructure in blockchain. Stephen, you developed Arbitrum at Princeton, and Sriram, you led the University of Washington blockchain lab. I guess the question over here I have is, how did your academic experience shape your approach to solving real world challenges? Stephen, why don't we start with you?
Absolutely, and great to be here today. Thank you for having us. For us at Off-Chain Labs, the academic roots has really impacted us in so many ways, right? From the entire approach to what we do, like the academic approach. So we want to solve the hardest problems. We're not afraid to tackle the hardest problems, but also we want to practically solve the hardest problems. And there are different types of research. There are some researchers that will work on problems that are really for beauty and may never have an application or may have an application centuries later. I've always been in the camp of really working on problems that have a near-term solution, something that I've much more applied, I'll say, which you take tools from the academic literature that haven't been applied in this context or develop new tools with the ultimate goal of solving problems. So that's basically the approach that we started off at Princeton with Ed and Harry, and we've continued to today, which is let's take the hardest problems, let's not shy away from them, let's not try to move around them, and let's actually take them head on and solve those. But even if you look at the culture of our company as well and the ethos of the space, it's a very much meritocracy. There's people don't care about titles or there's really the good ideas are what stand. That's something that is very much inspired from the academic context where you have things like blind reviews, and the idea is that it's really just about solving the problems, the best ideas, wherever they come from. It doesn't matter if I'm the CEO and you just joined the company yesterday. If you have an idea that's better than me, I want your idea to win, and that's something that deeply permeates everything we do.
Awesome. That sounds like a great approach and honestly a great culture. So Sriram, would love to hear your view. So academic experience shaping up how you solving these real world problems.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rishi. Great to be here, Stephen and you, to do this chat. My background is I used to be at the University of Washington, Seattle as an associate professor, used to run the UW Blockchain Research Lab, used to work on computational genomics and AI before I got into blockchains. The One of the kind of trajectory that I went through is I think it's related to a point that Stephen made, which is some academics, they're kind of the main driver is purely curiosity, right? So they work for, oh, I just want to understand this and then go deep into it. I used to be extremely on that camp. I just work on what interests me the most. And over a 10-year period, I migrated from a curiosity oriented to impact oriented. And then as you start moving towards this gradient from curiosity to impact, start seeing, oh, actually how do I make effective changes? For example, we built this protocol at the University of Washington and consensus protocol called Prism. And we wanted to get it be used. And we went to the Bitcoin guys and Ethereum guys and said, hey, here's the consensus protocol. Why don't you use it? And they're like, yeah, maybe it's cool, but no, thank you. I had very little appreciation of how hard it is to for these complex decentralized networks to actually do any kind of upgrades, and especially Bitcoin committed to um, immutability or near immutability. So having seen that, I think I would say even the starting point of why we did EigenLayer. So Eigen in German for your own layer. And the idea is instead of us, as an academic innovating and building something on top, can we build a framework, a substrate for many other academics and thinkers and builders all around the world to actually build anything that they want on top of a common platform? And I saw this as the unique power of crypto itself is you have normally if you want to have somebody build a trusted service like a financial exchange, you need to trust them, right? And what crypto uniquely did is it said, hey, if I'm building a smart contract on top of Ethereum, I don't need to trust you. I need to trust Ethereum, the blockchain, that system on top of which you're building. And therefore, like it opened up the scope for anybody to be innovative, right? And innovation being like a core driving value in academics, I think that's something that fascinated me. But there was no such commensurate thing when you go deeper into the stack, right? I want to build a whole new blockchain, but I don't want so the only way you could do it is to like, spin up your own token and say like, hey, my token's securing my own network, and then like build a network around that. And I saw this as like one of the big frictions in the whole space. And I said,
Yeah.
like, if I'm struggling to like be able to bootstrap myself, then there must be like lots of others who are trying, struggling with the same problem. Could we just build a network that helps anybody come and innovate and build new stuff on top? So I would say like that principle like of innovation kind of like translated into like our core value at Eigen, which is permissionless innovation, which
Mhm.
is all the way in the name, like EigenLayer. Um, so that's number one. Number two, I think there is also there is the thing that from academics I do not do, like, which is one of the things I was very worried about is like running a research lab. Like Eigen's not a research lab.
Mhm.
It's a product-oriented company. And that, for me, like that was one of the big worries is like I don't want to make this just because, my own bias is like actually, inventing new and cool stuff. We have to actually have an output objective and then drive the company towards that and construct a highly diverse team, diverse in the background and skill sets, like whether it's somebody who has like worked in big companies and ran big teams, or somebody who's just like never gone to college, right? And like, our team is like that. It's like actually a very unique kind of team. And like we bring in all these different cultures together. And part of the thing that I'm trying to avoid is to make it a purely academic research oriented team. So
Got it.
that's
Yeah, but I've had the pleasure of working with a bunch of people in academia from one of my own startups in the past. And one of the things you said over there was that that mentality shift from curiosity to impact, I think is very important and really interesting to hear from your side. Stephen, I'll go back to you. So the Arbitrum project began as academia research, as you mentioned, and got published in 2018. Looking back, what surprised you the most about that transition from going from theoretical framework into a production system handling, $12 billion in TVL and probably growing by the time I've said this. But yeah, what is that like? I guess what surprised you the most in that transition?
Yeah, I think that it's very, very different building writing a paper and building a system that even if there's code that doesn't really have to, has to compile in this local environment and has to basically convince, say, a reviewer or other academics that there's value there, which is very important. And actually the roots of everything and the foundation of everything we've done to actually going and building a fully complete system that lives in production. And you need to actually figure out every parameter and every detail. When you're building an academic paper and you're trying to prove a new concept, you'll focus on the innovation and the rest will kind of just like, paper over like, yeah, you can set that parameter or something. Actually, a good example is in the Arbitrum initial paper, we talked about you have to have some layer one. We didn't even talk about what that. We said it could be Ethereum, but it didn't actually, the earliest roots of Arbitrum even predate Ethereum. But the idea was a predate Ethereum being live in production, I should say, right? Because Arbitrum, if you go back on YouTube and you look for the very first video, you'll find a fall 2014 Princeton seminar video. Of course, Ethereum went live in July of 2015. And the idea is that's okay because you're building a system that's you're allowed to like plug in the theoretical parts, fill those in and say, just stub those in with something, and then you have this really, really cool system. But when you're actually building a production system that, as you said, is securing billions of dollars of real value and you need to make sure that every detail is correct, that it's secure, that it's audited, right? The fact that it works on paper doesn't mean that it actually will work in production. If you're like, as an analogy, if you're planning a big party, right, when you're in academia, you're kind of just focusing on the big hit dishes, like the really signature dishes. But when you're actually planning the party, you have to make sure that there are plates and cutlery and everything else and napkins, because otherwise, like this party won't work very well at all. So just focusing on all of those little details. Some of them might be excuse my words, but boring, right? Like, not the most exciting things. As academics, we like to focus on the more exciting problems, but translating that to a real system, I think, is really about getting every single detail correct, and it's very, very, very difficult. And actually, the second thing I would say is also that was on the technical side, but on the non-technical side, it's also the community. You can have
Hmm.
amazing technology, which is you can publish an academic paper on, you can actually fill out all those details. But at the end of the day, if nobody cares or you haven't convinced people that it's interesting and the people that are actually going to use a system, that it's not really worth very much because, in the realm of ideas, it's worth a lot. But in the realm of actually building a public system, those billions of dollars of TVL don't come from nowhere. It actually comes from people who have to be convinced, hey, this is interesting, this is different. I want to use this system. I think this is better than what I'm currently doing. So actually a focus on we can't do this alone. We can't go to our ivory tower or wherever we are and write a paper or even build a system and just expect it to be adopted in the world. You need a community of builders, a community of developers, a community of just users and others that are going to use a system, develop it, build alongside you. Those are critically important things and probably one of the most difficult things to get right because the academic parts, the technical parts, those are very much in your control. If you're a person or a team that has good talent and good ideas, you can build a very interesting system. But actually, building a community around it, I think, is incredibly, incredibly difficult. And it's something I think that Shriram has also done a fantastic job at EigenLayer, which is taking these academic ideas and actually getting people just extremely excited about them.
Yeah, and I mean, you guys correct me if I'm wrong here, but a lot of the time I've seen, startups come out of the academia side and everything is going well and everything, but just timing. Sometimes it's just the wrong timing, right? And that's an unfortunate side of it too that sometimes we see. But
I
fortunately enough
think
for you
the
guys,
timing
yeah.
can go wrong in one of two ways.
Hmm.
Just like something
Yeah,
there.
yeah, please.
When like there is so some of the academics who came out and like wanted to do things like layer one blockchains, they because there was money was flush at some point of time, people just like fund these things and you just have a lot of money and like no signal on actually how to optimize and get to product market fit. And so that is one kind of error because as I look back at our attempt, like I was mentioning, like Bitcoin, taking our protocols to Bitcoin, Ethereum, and then they said no, and then we're like, okay, maybe we just have to build our own blockchain, and then we tried for some time actually, like, and we said like we're not first writing a white paper, let's just like build a blockchain, and then we just like built it. And then we are like, okay, let's go raise money. And we couldn't actually raise money. It was actually three professors, me, David at Shea, who's at Stanford, and Pramod, who's at Princeton. And we just couldn't raise money.
Mm.
And so I was like, oh, how come like all these other professors raised money easily? And but what that does is it corrupts the signal because you think like,
Mm.
oh yeah, they've given me a lot of money, which means I must be doing something right. And then, but actually, like they're giving you money to like go and figure out what is the right thing to do. And I think taking signal from VCs is, I think, like the biggest error that somebody from academics moving into like this thing can do. Take signal from
Yeah,
customers,
interesting.
like the people Stephen was just talking about, like the ones who actually matter and the ones you have to convince to actually come and build on top of your platform.
I I remember it was 2018. It was the very first time we were announcing that we're actually commercialize this and building a company. I know it's also like different communities. We felt we were like, we were well respected in the academic community. We were one of the, earliest and blockchain labs at Princeton, and we were well known and had, a lot of respect in
Stephen's
the
the co-author
community.
of a famous book on blockchains. I learned my blockchain
Thank
in
you. But when we got into this conference, it was in San Francisco, it was a CESC conference, and Ed and I were there, and Ed got up on stage and announced Arbitrum, and I just could figure that like, okay, we announced this thing, and like everyone's gonna care. And like I remember like, all right, where's the line of people to talk to us afterwards? And the line like didn't show up. But yeah, to Sharam's point, you actually have to go and convince people and understanding who to convince and understanding what the milestones you celebrate are. Like raising capital is very, very important. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for our earliest investors. But that's like, okay, day one, you raise capital. Now you actually have to go and take that money and say, all right, I need to do something with it. Nothing I've done until now required money. I just sat and wrote a paper. Now I need to figure out how to take the paper plus this money and build something that's worth, really serves and creates a lot of value for a lot more people. And I think that's something which is, yeah, not no, there's no book on that, I guess.
That actually kind of leads me to my next question, which is it's for both of you, either of you. Like, both of you have the whole theme of this event is building through cycles, right? For Redefine, and you've navigated multiple crypto cycles through your academic days as well as building these companies. I guess a question I have is how has building through the bear market specifically, how has that been, and how has that actually strengthened, I guess, your infrastructure and platforms? But,
I can
either one of
open.
you, yeah, Sriram, please.
Yeah. Um, Building through a bad market is, I think, one of the best things that can happen to like long-term projects. I think like the failure mode of like a bear market is you just completely run out of capital.
Mm,
If there is things like resizing that teams may have to do, and but as long as there is just enough capital to continue to build, I think a bear market is the best thing that can happen to a long-term builder, because there is like a little bit of a frenzy, and every crypto investor knows these cycles and they have like all kinds of predictions and numbers.
mm,
But still, they undergo the frenzy, which is like when the number goes up, everybody feels like they're a genius and they just like throw money around, and when the number goes down, which it all inevitably does, and then they just freeze and there's no money to go around. They don't invest in any projects. It's like the opposite of like value investing or whatever Warren Buffett would say. And so that's just like pervades the space because, of course, a lot of retail trading is reflexive, like, oh, momentum or whatever trades that people do, like number goes up, they buy more. But also, it's true for VCs, which is a bizarre combination here because a lot of VCs also run like liquid portfolios. So it just like warps the whole mind space. But building through a bear market is actually like a really strong signal, gives you signals across various dimensions. Like, first, what matters, right? People think like, anything that I do like is gonna work when the number's up. Like, whereas and when like in the bear market, everybody's like has to be focused. We need to figure out what matters. We need to figure out which customers matter. We need to figure out what products matter. We need to figure out what features matter. So I think, uh, yeah. So my take is actually it's one of the best things that can happen to long-term deals.
got it. Stephen, do you wanna take a crack at it?
Yeah, basically agree. And I think the hard thing about a bear market is survival. So you really need to
Mm,
prepare, and it's very hard because, like, to Shriram's point, when everything's going well, it's like bliss and like the market's up and it just keeps going, and you can't really like imagine there will be another rainy day, right? Even though we've seen the cycles multiple times, like it's in the moment, it's easy to forget about and say, oh, hey, okay, I don't need to prepare for the future. Like, let's just spend everything now, the money will be here. But like the important thing is actually, as a founder, is to stay disciplined and make sure, in my case, I like to keep 3 years of runway around, right?
mm,
Because 3 years is obviously a long time and allows you to just keep building. It says no matter what happens, I don't have to pay attention to the market right now. Obviously, we'd all like the market to go up, but ultimately I know that I can do work at least for the next 3 years, and often it's more than that, but at least for the next 3 years, I don't have to worry about the market. I know that we're safe and secure. And that gives you the luxury and the freedom, and not only you, but everyone that's depending on you to know, hey, we're in a strong spot. We like the market to go in the same, we all like the market to go in the same direction, but ultimately, we'll be able to keep building and building what we think is important. And that's actually the most important thing because as a builder, it's during the times of frenzy that you have a lot more pressure from people actually. It's like, hey, you need to build this right now. We need this feature right
yeah.
now. During the times of like the bear market, like, yeah, no one wants to talk to you. They don't actually care, don't worry about it. And actually this happened initially when we built the company. It wasn't exactly the same thing with the bear market, but like people didn't think when I raised capital initially in 2018, a lot of investors would say, I mean, obviously, we found some very good investors who were aligned with our mission, but back then, a lot of people said to me, I don't think scaling is a real problem. I don't think there's going to be a problem in the next 5 years. I think we have a lot, bigger problems. What happens is a year or two later, scaling became the number one problem that everyone was focused on. And these same investors came back and said, where are you guys already? Why didn't you launch yet? I said, well, thankfully we found other people to give us capital because you weren't interested back then. But these things take time to build, and those pressures come back. So it's during the time, particularly if you have strong conviction and you think there's going to be long-term value, right? I never know what the markets are going to do. Never take short-term investment advice from me. But the idea is, if you believe you're building something long term, it's a bear market that gives you the ability to focus because no one is bothering you, no one's asking questions, no one's actually interested in what you're necessarily doing right now. You continue to build that, and then when the cycle comes around and everyone says, "Oh my gosh, we need this right now," you're there and said, "Yes, I had the foresight to see this." And that's one of the nice things about academia and that background as well. To tie back to before, you're always like deeply convicted about what you're building, and you're used to building things that no one sees the value in yet, and you have to actually make that case to the world. And
Yeah.
what's really nice is actually when you have the freedom to do that.
Yeah, it's amazing. I was at an early employee at BlockFi, so I definitely saw my share of bear and bull markets. And I think one thing I walked away from, and I'm seeing it at Google, you see it at Google with AI and all, anything it's new, right? It's still a young industry, blockchain, obviously, and AI is not young per se, but it's going through its own kind of growth. And when it's good, it's super good. And when it's bad, it's like the world has ended, right? And those extremes is hard to manage internally because the demands are just so different, right? So it's really interesting to hear your views.
Yeah, I
Shriram, I'm
always like
gonna,
to say,
yeah, yeah,
as a founder, like, we all experience highs and lows, but as a founder, the pendulum swings, I think, more dramatically to the,
yeah,
to the highs and lows. And also you'll have the lowest of lows and the highest of highs could be within days or even hours of each other, right? Oh no, I think everything's over, we're done, to wow, everything's amazing. We just landed the biggest deal. And literally, it's like being able to deal with that emotional roller coaster, I think is one of the hardest things about being a founder. And I think in a typical, job where you're sort of part of a larger organization and cushion from that, they'll have highs and lows, but they're typically, I think, a little
hmm.
less steep in their curve.
I found it hard to relate to other people, well, other people to relate to what I was going through because it's like you're so, like you said, it can happen within a few days, right? So people like, what is going on?
Yeah.
All right, we'll get into a little bit of nitty gritty. Sriram, for you, your analogy of cities don't have armies, but nation have armies is compelling for shared security. Critics have been there. Vitalik has warned about systemic risks if too many services rely on the same batch of ether. So, what are your kind of thoughts around the concerns of putting all eggs in one security basket?
Amazing. Thanks for that question, Rishi. Uh, I think this is, one of the things that coming from an academic roots, we took this question kind of like super seriously, and I think we've made both like foundational theoretical progress, but also like practically built some really cool things based on that. So let me start with the premise. Like EigenLayer is this restaking platform, right? So the core idea of restaking is like you stake in Ethereum and stake into other networks, right? And the same thing, like you can just abstract even inside EigenLayer. Inside EigenLayer, there are right now like 50 plus services. We call them AVSs, autonomous verifiable services. Autonomous because they run on their own. They're not run by anybody. What do I mean by that run on their own? Anybody who has ETH or whatever tokens can come and stake and keep them running. So it's kind of permissionless to keep them running. And then second is verifiable. It's verifiable because if you didn't run the service correctly, there's an on-chain slashing contract that can actually like hold the staker to account and replace them and take their money away. So these are autonomous verifiable services. And so when you think about these services, even inside EigenLayer, it's easier to understand this. When you're staking into like 50 services, then you are actually like sharing security across all of this stuff. And so that could be like a problem. And the question is there like over leverage? Is like what is happening? Like how do you account for all this stuff? And our initial answers were closer to, hey, look at Ethereum. Inside Ethereum, there's a lot of apps, right? So or L2s and other stuff. They're all secured by Ethereum's blockchain, right? And so there is shared security inside Ethereum. So you have apps or smart contracts, and all smart contracts share the same security. And this one question there was like, hey, Ethereum has only like 50 to 100 billion staked, but $500 billion of assets. Why is that okay? Like, is this over leveraged? Like, how do you actually understand this? And we did like a whole really a paper that I'm really, really happy about. It's called Stake Sure. That paper basically we understood like what is actually like the kind of foundational security model for blockchains. And we answered that blockchains are secured, in the slow mode, not by the stakers in the network, but by social consensus. The idea being that even if a majority of the stakers say something wrong, like or make an invalid block or try to reorg the chain, whatever, but they only have they cannot say like, hey, here is a finalized block from Ethereum from 1 month back. Like nobody will believe that. There is a time scale beyond which even like a majority malicious nodes have no power. And so that contains the kind of like net damage that stakers can inflict on the network. And therefore, the stakers are not really securing the blocks from like the historical past, but only the transactions happening within a certain period. And so this is one of our like core insights. And using this, you can kind of understand why like a $50 billion stake is sufficient to secure like a $500 billion network, because all the value is not at motion all the time, because the stake is securing value at motion, not value at rest. Okay, so that's kind of like a fundamental foundational question about what blockchain security model itself is, right? Like, why is Ethereum secure? Right? So it's at that level. But going to EigenLayer, one of the things we did is we said, okay, and there were like a bunch of insights from that. The way we apply it is we have two models. One is fully shared security, where like, you stake and then you secure all these services with the same stake. And the second model is unique security. You can actually say, this is a portion of stake I'm apportioning only to be slashed by this particular service. And so you can actually apportion the stake to various services. And we migrated from like a full shared security model to a unique security model where you're actually saying like each AVS has a portion of security. And okay, so in that model, why is staking, restaking interesting? And it's interesting because what you could do is you could say, if there are five services like an Oracle, an AI, like a layer two or a bridge or whatever, like some bunch of things that an app is depending on, you could say, um, I'm willing to be slashed if any one of those five services, all these services are provided to the same application, right? So this is our like long-term model is like applications come in and mix and match services, kind of like what happens on Google Cloud, right?
Mhm.
People come in, there's a list of services, they use like a storage service, like a network service, like a computation service, like a virtualization service, like a data monitoring service, all this stuff, right? And mix and match them to build whatever they want. And we have a similar view for what blockchains should be. Like there should be like this roster of services that you should be able to mix and match. And so when you get into that model, you might want something like, even if um, instead of having separate security for each of the things that you depend on, you say, I want aggregated security for all the things that I depend on, because I don't want to pay a separate economic fee for each of the services that I depend on. I want to bundle them and use them together. So EigenLayer and shared security models allow for like saying, oh, I'm staking and I'll be slashed by one of these five services, right? Or like, combinations of services. So that's where we are headed. So it's a long answer, but I wanted to clarify the kind of foundational model for EigenLayer.
No, I appreciate that. I think that's all we asked, right? I think it'll be really helpful for the viewers. Stephen, for you, you've been pretty vocal about Arbitrum's current design being more efficient, practical, and cost-effective than, say, based rollup designs that people like Vitalik have proposed. Can you elaborate on this and why you believe that the application-specific scaling through Arbitrum Orbit is superior?
Yeah, I think that first of all, I'll say one of the benefits of Ethereum ecosystem and really the place where Ethereum shines is it has diversity of experimentation, right? In other ecosystems, often you have a single development team or logically a single development team and a single mission. And people actually mistake this and think that this is a good thing and this is, Ethereum has too much discord and fragmentation of ideas and fragmentation of the networks. But actually, I think that innovation is really Ethereum's core strength. So the first thing I'll say is Nothing I say today is me discouraging any sort of innovation. I think it's fantastic that there are people that are working on other models that are different than what we're building. And ultimately, similar to what I said, is my attitude in the company. It's also my attitude towards the ecosystem. The best ideas will often win, and sometimes there aren't best ideas. Sometimes the idea is that it depends really on the application, and certain ideas are better suited for certain applications. But the reason I think that Arbitrum's specific design is, correct and, good for at least many or most of the applications that we see today, really, comes from the idea that there are a lot of efficiencies that are actually brought on by having what we call, a sequencer that's not so a base rollup. For those that aren't familiar, the idea is that you use Ethereum as the sequencer for that, whereas, today the Arbitrum chains have a sequencer that's offline that will actually process the transactions. One of the core benefits of that is that it gives you really fast processing times. And there are proposals, of course, to do this with based rollups as well, with something called pre-confirmations. I don't want to get too technical here, but the idea is actually there are significant benefits of giving the sequencer latitude over slightly longer periods of time. Because what the sequencer does, the sequencer says, hey, you send the sequencer a transaction, and it goes ahead and confirms that transaction and puts that on chain. But it gives you a very fast confirmation, even before the chain, right? The chain takes 10, 12 seconds or longer to actually to get finality to actually process your transaction. With the sequencer, the arbiter sequencer gives you an answer within 100 to 250 milliseconds. You'll get a response from the arbiter sequencer, and assuming you trust the sequencer to actually keep its promise, you know where your transaction will sit on the chain. We've actually done research. We published a paper about the optimal sequencing strategies, and often, it's not posting every transaction right away because there's an overhead to posting transactions to Ethereum. This idea of you post batches, and we've done research on what are the optimal batch sizes and intervals. The problem is when you have, this is just one example. The problem is when you have something like a base sequencer, the base signature that relies on these pre-confirmations where whoever is making the current block is going to give you some guarantee. They don't have the ability to guarantee you something about the next block. So they can't hold on to my transaction now and say, hey, it's more efficient if I actually hold that with the next block transactions or the next slots transactions and go ahead and actually, post those together. So you're actually more limited in the design space, and often that leads to inefficiency. And what I'll say is Arbitrum's current design didn't come from us, picking it out of nowhere. It came from actually iteration. In fact, if you look back to the initial Arbitrum paper, we didn't use the term because the term didn't exist then, but it was, I would actually call it a based rollup. There was no sequencer in the Arbitrum Academic 2018 paper. That was something, and actually, I was vocally against sequencers at the time they were introduced, and really, I only came to understand it, and actually, we improved on the design to a point where we were comfortable with it over the course of many years. And I think that's actually a good example of what I mean by the diversity of opinions, because 7 years ago, I was against sequencers, and I would have been in base rollup camp today. But it's 7 years of actually building a system in production and being open to the ideas of others that we learned, and we came to the point where we are today. But I still don't think we're at that final point. I'm sure that there will be other ideas that influence Arbitrum's design. And the nice thing about Arbitrum also, it's not an all or nothing, like all on this design. And if this is wrong and someone else has a better idea, like all else is lost. No, we're always happy to incorporate other ideas. In fact, Arbitrum itself, if you go back, I keep mentioning the academic paper, but I'll do it once more. One of the core innovations of that paper was the virtual machine design. It was called the Arbitrum Virtual Machine, or the AVM. And we shipped Arbitrum in production with that in 2021. We sunsetted that in 2022, and we in favor of WASM WebAssembly. And you might say, hey, like this is your baby. You worked literally years with Ed and Harry on this virtual machine design, which was like unlike anything that existed before. Like, how did you do that? And the answer is, I wasn't building the AVM company. I was building the company that was trying to solve a problem, a goal-oriented company. And the tool, the AVM, was a fantastic tool for its time. And at the time, I actually didn't think it was possible to build what we were building with an off-the-shelf infrastructure like WASM. We learned that over time we could, and we replaced it. And we wouldn't be here without that. It's like a staircase. Right? You look back at the initial steps, like, hey, I'm so high up now. How did those steps were unimportant. It's like, well, maybe, but if you never took that step, you would have never gotten to the step you are today. And that's how I view this. And we're continuing to iterate on our ideas. And the same thing is true with ZK rollups and optimistic rollups as well. Our goal is to solve a problem. Today, I still firmly believe we're still in the camp where optimistic rollups outperform in maturity, efficiency, scalability. But we're closely getting to, where ZK rollups are far, far, far more along that curve than they were 5 years ago, and far more along that curve than they were 1 year ago, and probably further than I expected them to be. And again, when the right time is for those ideas, we'll incorporate those. We have a very, very strong ZK bench at Off-Chain Labs, looking and always saying, how can we improve this? How can we bring other ideas in, when it makes sense in a way that it makes sense? And so those are my specific thoughts today, but I'm always happy to entertain new ideas. And I can guarantee you that just like looking back 5 years, Arbitrum looks very different today than it did then. I'm sure looking forward 5 years, Arbitrum's design will continue to iterate and continue to evolve and will look very different. What the shape of that is, I don't know. But what I do know is it will be all in the pursuit of serving users better and actually building a system that gives developers and users better tools over time.
Awesome. It's actually, it's really refreshing to hear your mentality and approach towards this. So thank you for that. I'm going to move it on to a little bit more into the kind of future and mass adoption. Sreeram, you've mentioned EigenLayer as humanity's coordination engine. So out of curiosity, beyond financial applications, what non-financial use cases for restaking excite you the most for driving that mass adoption, I guess?
Yeah, thank you so much, Rishi. So firstly, like, what is our broad thesis? Like, why am I here? I was doing genomics before, and I think I was doing working with some of the really good people. I wrote a paper with David Baker, who won the Nobel Prize last year for chemistry in protein folding. So, I came from that background and I got into crypto, and like the main thesis that I came into crypto with is it can upgrade our coordination infrastructure. So I look at the internet as our information infrastructure, right? So we communicate with each other through the internet. Like, this conversation would not be possible without it. But what is missing in just the internet is, people say, like, for example, crypto is internet native money, and that's what's new, right? Like, and that's like the Bitcoin thesis. But I think there is something much more. When you want to build a coordination system, like, let's say the three of us want to like get together and start something, right? Like, we want to be able to enter into commitments, contracts, agreements that are automatically enforcing on the internet by code. And so when you think about a world of coordination, how is coordination being helped by like crypto, is because it is a mechanism for enforcing the conditions of coordination. Like, you and I come into like a contract, and then we say these are the conditions of the contract, and then it just automatically executes itself. So that's like the core thesis. If you upgrade humanity's coordination infrastructure, it's just everything is going to get better, right? And you can ask, like, what are these things? Like, outside of money and financial applications, what is going to get better? So I want to also take you back to 2017, 2018. Like, if you just asked around in the space, like, people, like, what do you think, blockchain is going to do? You'd get a very different answer from if you just polled randomly in crypto today. Today, you'd get like, it's Bitcoin, stablecoin, meme coin, right? Like, that's the three things, right? So Bitcoin, stablecoin, meme coin. Like, what else is that? Or maybe like there's a perp and lending. But if you go asked in like 2017, especially in the Ethereum crowd, like the Ethereum crowd, like particularly has this like futuristic thinking, and people would have said, we are going to disintermediate Uber. Like, Uber should not be like, a monopoly sitting in the middle. We are going to disintermediate the cloud, right? And we're talking to the head at Google Cloud here, but still, right? And, every marketplace needs to be like automatic, self-enforcing, like not controlled by intermediaries. We're going to displace insurance, right? So recently, like, people think about, what happened at United Healthcare, like this big disaster. And it's because people have lost trust in the systems that actually like insure them. And when you think about like what can blockchains do, can you have an automated insurance adjudication, like written as like, smart contracts, using smart contracts and AI, like directly on chain? So the scope, I think, of what the blockchain project is, I think, is basically just gone down to this narrow funnel of it's this like three things. But I'm squarely in the camp. If that was the three things, I would not be here. And it's not interesting. It's not exciting. I'm squarely in the camp that we can actually make our entire economy verifiable and programmable. And that's the whole point of blockchains. And why do you need it? You need it in every place where trust is the bottleneck. And human society, in fact, civilization itself is just a system of trust, right? Like and commitments that we make to each other. And so you can upgrade every one of that, how nations interact with each other, how do we solve climate change, right? So how do you solve education? How do you fund for education? Let me just take this example. And on the left and the right, you see like polar opposite views. Let's say on the left, people say like, give free education, increase the tax rate. On the right, people say like, you need to pay for your own school. Is there some other like different solution that blockchains? I think absolutely. For example, why if it's possible and verifiable that somebody can say, hey, I'm going to pay like 10% of my future income to the teachers and to my college, and I'm going to fund my own education from my future value. And what do blockchains do? They bring verifiability to that future income. Like otherwise, how do I know how much money I made if they're all on a chain and it's verifiable? And I think just like the structure of like the underlying structure of society can be changed. And that's like why I'm in this. Like one of my academic things I learned, actually, I interviewed at Caltech in 2014. And one of the questions they asked me was, hey, the thing that I was working on, some DNA sequencing thing, they said, what if somebody else solved this problem, DNA sequencing thing? Like, what would you do? I said, I don't know. I was doing something 2 years back, and like I'll figure out something else, and that'll be more interesting, and I'll solve it. And then says, no, no, no. Suppose I give you 30 years. You're locked up in your lab. I'll send you infinite resources, the best people in the world, but you have to come back and tell me what you did in 30 years. What would you do? And this is a little bit of an unconstrained thinking that I had never done till that point. I was like, oh shit, I have no idea what I would do if you give me 30 years and infinite resources. And of course, I didn't get that job at Caltech. But from then, I always think about that question. So that's part of like when we say things like we want to build humanities coordination, people think it's like some grandstanding thing. No, actually, like once you have a vision like that, we can only still take like small steps. We're building restaking or we're building a data availability. But the really cool thing that happens is if somebody solves these problems, I'm not worried. I'm actually happy, right? Because if they're solved, because I don't really want to solve this, I want to solve humanities coordination problems. So I'll just go build, an education startup on top of this or something. So anyway, so that's my story.
Awesome. No, thank you for that. I'm going to stick with the same theme here, Stephen, with adoption. With Arbitrum Orbit enabling custom blockchain deployment, you're essentially democratizing blockchain creation. How do you see this impacting, I guess, enterprise adoption and traditional businesses integrating within Web3?
So there are two camps of people in the blockchain space now, and certainly in the smart contract, the EVM blockchain space. There are those that will tell everyone they need their own blockchain. And whatever, it doesn't matter what you're building, you should have your own chain. And there are those that will tell you that nobody needs their own blockchain. Everything should just be on a single large public network because there are benefits of like interoperability and just having direct access to these other applications. One of the nice things about where I sit and the products that we offer is I don't find myself in either of those camps because we have a top offering actually in both of those categories, right? Arbitrum One is a top blockchain in and of itself. It's also a top layer 2 for Ethereum, but it's also, you can just look at it, right? If you look at like, the leaderboards like DeFi Llama, it's just ranked as a blockchain and it fares quite well by itself. And also Arbitrum Orbit is probably the top stack, the most adopted stack for launching your own blockchain today securely, in our case, generally on Ethereum, but also with data availability to EigenLayer or other places as well. So it's a very customizable stack where you can launch and create your own experience. My thought is here that it really depends on who you are and what your application is and what you're trying to build. Whether you should launch your own blockchain. But if you zoom out and you look at the entire offering to Arbitrum Orbit and to Arbitrum Orbit, and also just Arbitrum One, also just the entire Ethereum space. There's something and some tool there for everyone, no matter what level you are, that you want to build. If you have the capabilities and infrastructure and the demand to build your own blockchain, you could do that super easily together, with the Arbitrum Orbit stack and the RASes, so these service providers that will help you actually launch a blockchain. For that, those includes the likes of Conduit, Caldera, Alchemy, Gelato, a lot of companies that will actually take the Arbitrum technology and go ahead and build a blockchain for you. Or you could say, hey, I don't think we have the sort of demand or need for our own network, but you can easily spin up an application, with just one or two developers and launch it on a public blockchain. That's the nice thing about, so the way I think about this generally is democratizing access, whether you need your own chain or you're just going to build an application. The nice thing is about blockchain, I'll take DeFi as an example, because that's one place where Arbitrum really shines. Traditionally, if you want to innovate in the financial sector, it's basically impossible. You have to have the right pedigree, go to the right schools, manage to get the right job, and even so, you're going to have to work your way up through this organization, which will start off at the very bottom, and maybe somewhere someone will listen to your idea and actually go ahead and give you the ability to say launch your own feature in the deep, complex financial ecosystem. Right. What blockchain does, it really democratizes access. And this is finance, but again, it's really so many different industries that can utilize the same foundational principles and build this. It gives you the ability to just say, hey, I have a good idea. I can tap directly into deeply liquid markets. I can use because of the way that the code is open source generally, I can use other um, existing protocols, tap into their liquidity, use them as building blocks, and build something that's new and different. And the nice thing is, I can do this all by myself. And the reason is because it's trustless. You don't have to trust me. You can see my code. My code might be audited. You can audit my code yourself, and you can say, hey, I'm not just like trusting and throwing my money into someone in their garage with a cool idea, but I actually have looked at their code, I vetted their code, I know that it's sitting on a secure blockchain, and I have complete comfort throwing my funds into your idea, and actually, again, the best ideas win. So I view this as really democratizing and leveling the playing field for everyone, whether you're a developer that wants to enter a particular industry, or if you actually want to go ahead and launch your own blockchain. And to your final, point about institutions, I think that the Arbitrum Orbit offering in particular is going to be very important there, because often institutions are the ones where it actually makes the most sense to launch your own blockchain, because often they have products and they have the ability to drive people to a particular chain, right? If people are just going to use your product on some chain, whatever chain they're on, you're trying to get demand from people that are already on a blockchain, it might not make sense to actually launch your own chain. But if you have an off-chain user base, you have some successful financial service or infrastructure or other sector as well, and you could say, hey, I'm going to bring my users onto the blockchain and they're going to follow me, then a lot of times it makes sense to actually own your own platform, just like they do in the Web 2 sense, right? So I think it's going to make it much easier for these institutions to launch blockchains, because they won't have to deal with the nitty-gritty and the things that, Sreeram and myself and many others have taken years to figure out and iron out some of the details. You can start literally, where we are at today and just focus on launching your application on the blockchain.
Awesome. Okay, awesome. Thanks, Shriram. Do you wanna close us out and talk a little bit about the future?
Oh yeah, I talked like broadly about
Yeah.
blockchains, just on specifically on Eigen. A couple of quick things. Uh, the reason we built Eigen is to expand the scale of programmability, right? So right now you can write programs on top of the VM inside a chain, but you could actually like use this and build many other services that are simply not possible to build inside like a blockchain. For example, I want to build a store for storing secrets, or right, because what I do is I take the secret, spread it across the network. Each node only gets access to a small portion. So that's an example of a secret share. You can build things like, oh, I want to use a different kind of computer. I want to use a trusted execution environment. I want to use GPUs to run my computation. I want to use like, tensor processing units, or like Ironwood from Google, right? So you want to use these like powerful machines, like you just don't have access inside like existing blockchains, as well as like I have to write inside like the frameworks and programming environments that are given to me. could I just take like, the largest open source database and then slam it on top of a blockchain today? It takes a lot of work to do that. But using Eigen, you can actually like expand the scale of programmability quite a bit. And where we are in our journey is we have like stakers staking right now 12 billion plus of stake on the EigenLayer platform. We have thousands of operators on the network, starting from home operators to like uh, crypto operators like Coinbase and Blockdaemon, to even Google Cloud actually runs an operator on Eigen. Like, thanks for the support there. But going to the next side is AVSs. We have 50 plus AVSs on mainnet and like another 100 coming up. Each service is like a very complex distributed system. So I'm really glad to see like the scale of innovation that's going on there. The next frontier that we're going to is apps. How do we encourage? So it's not just services that are built on top of Eigen, but how do apps actually consume these services? So that's like what we're working on next. Really excited for the future of applications coming and using this programmability to create this verifiable economy. So that's, yeah.
Awesome. Okay, awesome. Thank you. Thank you both so much. I think this has been, thank you for your time. And honestly, it's been really insightful. I hope the viewers feel the same way. And yeah, thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rishi.
Take
Thank you,
care.
Stephen.
Right.